In the city of Cyprus, more than 2,000 years ago, a wealthy merchant named Zeno watched his entire fortune sink beneath the waves. One moment he was a man of privilege and abundance. The next, he was left with nothing. A storm had swallowed everything he had worked for, everything he thought defined his life. Now imagine yourself in his place. One single event outside of your control erases years of effort. How would you react? Anger? Despair? A sense that life had cheated you? Most of us would collapse under that weight. But Zeno did something different. He chose not to break. From that moment, he began a path that would lay the foundations of Stoicism, a philosophy that has lasted for centuries because it answers one of life's most pressing questions. How do you become undefeatable? We live in a world that feels, in many ways, just as turbulent as Zeno's. Jobs disappear overnight. Relationships fracture. Financial markets crash. Virus is spread. The truth is, none of us are safe from sudden loss. And when it strikes, it can feel like the ground beneath our feet has given way. Yet, history and philosophy remind us that even in the darkest of moments, there is a choice. We may not control the storms, but we can control how we face them. This choice is what separates the people who crumble from those who stand tall. Think about it. Every one of us carries battles unseen. Stress from work, pressure to succeed, the fear of failure gnawing in the background. Society constantly tells us that our value is tied to what we own, how much we earn, or how others perceive us. But deep down, we know those things can vanish in an instant. What, then, truly makes us strong? What makes us unbreakable? Stoicism offers an answer. Not the cold suppression of feelings, but a clear and practical way of living. It teaches us to separate what we can control from what we cannot, to endure discomfort so we are not destroyed by it, and to root our happiness in values that no one, not nature, not society, not even fate can take away from us. This is the art of becoming undefeatable. In the minutes ahead, we will walk through timeless lessons of Stoicism, from Zeno's first encounter with loss, to the writings of Marcus Aurelius, to modern figures who endured unimaginable hardship yet emerged stronger, not weaker. You will see that being undefeatable is not about never falling. It is about learning how to rise again and again with clarity and strength. So let me ask you directly, what would it take for you to become someone who cannot be defeated by life's storms? By the end of this journey, you may discover that the answer has been with you all along, waiting to be uncovered in the wisdom of Stoicism. When we think of strength, we often imagine someone who has it all together: financial stability, influence, security. By that measure, Zeno of Cyprus seemed untouchable. He was a wealthy trader, a man whose livelihood was built on ships and commerce, carrying goods across the Mediterranean. Yet in one moment, all of it vanished. A storm sank his ship, his cargo, and his fortune. Overnight, he went from rich merchant to impoverished wanderer. Now pause for a moment. Put yourself in his sandals. Imagine you had spent decades building your life's work, only to watch it dissolve in front of you because of something as uncontrollable as the sea. What happens inside you at that moment? For most people, it would trigger despair, maybe even the collapse of identity. When you define yourself by what you own, then losing it all means losing yourself. And that is where many of us, even today, find ourselves trapped. Zeno, however, responded differently. He did not drown with his fortune. He chose to transform the disaster into the seed of a new way of life. He began to study philosophy, immersing himself in the works of Socrates and other thinkers. Out of this journey emerged the foundation of Stoicism, a philosophy rooted in resilience, acceptance, and the refusal to let external events dictate inner strength. This is the paradox at the heart of becoming undefeatable. Zeno lost everything, yet he gained something more powerful than wealth: the realization that no storm, no loss, no external force could destroy the mind that chose to remain steady. He turned a shipwreck into a beginning. And isn't that exactly the test life gives us over and over? Think about your own life. Maybe you've experienced your own kind of shipwreck. The business you poured yourself into failed. A relationship you thought would last forever ended suddenly. Or maybe it wasn't dramatic, maybe it was the quiet erosion of dreams, the feeling that the future you imagined for yourself is slipping further away. In those moments, it's tempting to believe that life itself has betrayed you. But Zeno's story reminds us that even the worst loss can open the door to a new kind of strength, if we choose to see it that way. Notice what Zeno did not do. He didn't spend the rest of his days cursing fate. He didn't sink into bitterness, replaying the moment over and over in his mind. He reframed his tragedy as training. The loss stripped him of comfort, yes, but it also stripped him of illusion, the illusion that security comes from wealth or possessions. It forced him to build his foundation on something more enduring, the mind, the soul, the discipline of thought. Modern psychology echoes this. Researchers call it post-traumatic growth, the phenomenon where people emerge from devastating experiences stronger, more focused, and with a deeper sense of purpose. Zeno was an early example of this. His shipwreck was the trauma. Stoicism was the growth. Here's the lesson for us. Undefeatability does not mean you never suffer. It means you do not allow suffering to define you. You take the blow, but instead of collapsing, you rise not because life spared you, but because you discovered a strength deeper than circumstance. That is what Zeno discovered when the sea stole his wealth. So ask yourself, where in your life have you faced a storm? Where have you watched something precious slip beyond your control? And how did you respond? Did you curse the storm? Or did you learn to sail in its aftermath? The Stoics would argue that these storms are not accidents, they are opportunities. Every loss is a training ground. Every setback is a lesson. Zeno's collapse was not the end of his story. It was the moment that shaped him into the man who would teach countless others how to live with unshakable strength. To become undefeatable, we must first experience what it means to be defeated and then choose differently. Zeno chose differently, and in that choice, he lit a torch that still burns for us today. When most people hear the word Stoic, they imagine someone with a stiff upper lip, someone who shows no emotion, who endures hardship in silence without a tear or a smile. Even in everyday language, we use the word Stoic to describe someone who doesn't flinch, doesn't cry, doesn't complain. And while there is a kernel of truth in this image, it barely scratches the surface of what Stoicism truly is. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, never instructed himself to become a stone. He felt grief when his children died, fatigue during endless wars, frustration with betrayal and politics. Seneca, one of the most eloquent Stoics, admitted his struggles with anger, fear, and the temptations of wealth. Epictetus, born a slave, suffered through pain and hardship before he found freedom in philosophy. None of these men were emotionless. What they pursued was not the absence of feeling, but the mastery of it. Stoicism is not about erasing emotions. It is about refusing to let emotions govern your life. It is about looking reality in the face, whether joyful or tragic, and choosing how you will respond. In fact, the Stoics believed emotions themselves were not inherently bad. They become destructive only when they overwhelm judgment, when they hijack reason, when they turn us into slaves of reaction instead of masters of response. This is why Stoicism is better understood as a lens, a way of seeing the world clearly. Imagine putting on glasses that strip away the distortions of fear, anger, and false hope. What remains is the truth of the situation. The Stoics believed that truth, however harsh, was always better than illusion. And once you see clearly, you can act wisely. In today's world, the misconception of Stoicism as emotional numbness is especially dangerous. We already live in a culture that often encourages people especially men, to suppress their emotions, to bottle up pain until it erupts in destructive ways. That is not Stoicism. That is denial. True Stoicism says, feel what you feel, acknowledge it, but do not be ruled by it. When Marcus Aurelius grieved, he wrote about it. When Seneca struggled, he confessed it in letters. When Epictetus spoke of suffering, he used it as a lesson in resilience. They did not deny their emotions, they disciplined them. This distinction matters because it speaks to how we approach our own struggles. Let's take an example. You lose your job. A person who suppresses emotion might say, "I don't care," while secretly crumbling inside. A Stoic, on the other hand, would admit, "Yes, this hurts. Yes, I feel fear." But then they would add, "What part of this is in my control? What can I do next? How can I turn this into strength?" One approach hides from reality. The other engages it head-on. If Stoicism were only about suppressing emotion, it would have died long ago. Instead, it has lasted for over 2,000 years because it offers something much more practical, a framework for understanding life as it is, and a discipline for living with clarity and courage no matter the circumstance. Consider how often we are told to chase happiness through things outside of us: money, status, approval. But the Stoics argued that true freedom comes from rooting our peace in what cannot be taken away: our judgment, our values, our choices. Emotions come and go. External conditions rise and fall. But within each of us lies a space of stability. To live as a Stoic is to return to that space again and again. So when people dismiss Stoicism as cold or unemotional, they miss the heart of it. Stoicism is deeply human. It acknowledges the reality of suffering but refuses to be crushed by it. It honors the reality of joy but refuses to be enslaved by it. It is not about being less alive, it is about being more alive. Because you are no longer at the mercy of forces you cannot control. Ask yourself, how many times have your emotions clouded your judgment? How many decisions did you make in anger or out of fear that you later regretted? What if you had paused, acknowledged the feeling, but chosen a response rooted in clarity? That pause, that choice, that is Stoicism. Stoicism is not about becoming less human. It is about becoming the kind of human who can meet life fully, honestly, and with the strength to remain standing, no matter what storms come. At the heart of Stoicism lies a principle so simple that it almost sounds too obvious, and yet, when you look closely, you realize how rarely we live by it. Epictetus called it the dichotomy of control. In his words, some things are up to us, and some things are not. Everything we suffer, everything we fear, everything we hope for can be placed into one of those two categories. The tragedy is that most of us spend our lives fighting in the wrong one. We chase outcomes that were never truly ours to command. We try to bend circumstances, manipulate people, or demand fairness from a universe that was never built to guarantee it. When those things fail us, as they inevitably do, we feel defeated. But the Stoics remind us, defeat doesn't come from what happens. It comes from forgetting the line between what you can control and what you cannot. Marcus Aurelius, burdened with wars and betrayal, repeated this to himself daily. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Imagine the weight of being Emperor of Rome, responsible for the lives of millions. Imagine how easy it would be to collapse under the pressure of things you cannot fix them in. Disease, politics, the shifting loyalties of friends and enemies." And yet Marcus told himself, the storms outside may rage, but the mind inside remains free. That is the real fortress. Now look at our world. How many hours of our lives are wasted worrying about things far outside our reach? The economy, the latest political scandal, the opinions of strangers online, the future that has not arrived. All of these belong to the category of not up to us, and yet they dominate our thoughts. They drain our energy. They make us miserable. The Stoic solution is not apathy, but clarity. See the boundary for what it is, and then place your effort where it actually matters on yourself. Your choices, your values. Take work, for example. You cannot control if your company will downsize. You cannot control whether your boss wakes up in a bad mood, but you can control how prepared you are, the integrity of the work you produce, the attitude you bring to each challenge. When you focus there, you build a sense of strength that no external setback can take away. Or think about relationships. You cannot control whether another person loves you back, whether they betray you, whether they stay or leave. But you can control how you show up with honesty, with respect, with boundaries that protect your dignity. When you root your worth in your own conduct rather than in someone else's approval, you free yourself from the tyranny of what you cannot control. Even in something as ordinary as daily frustration, the principle applies. Someone cuts you off in traffic. The fact is out of your control. The reaction, however, is yours. Do you let anger poison the rest of your day? Or do you shrug, remind yourself that impatience is their burden, not yours, and move on? This small choice, repeated over time, builds the muscle of resilience. Modern psychology calls this locus of control. People who believe their well-being depends primarily on external forces tend to be more anxious, more depressed, and less effective. Those who internalize responsibility, who focus on what they can actually change, tend to live with more confidence and peace. The Stoics understood this long before it became science. Acceptance, then, is not resignation. It is not saying, I can't change anything, so I bother. That's fatalism. Acceptance is clarity. It is the ability to say, this is mine to shape, and this is not. I will not waste my energy on the latter. And once you see that, life becomes lighter. You stop fighting the tide and instead learn how to sail. Ask yourself, how much of your suffering comes not from reality itself, but from your refusal to accept reality? How often have you clung to an outcome, demanding it must happen, only to be crushed when it didn't? And how would your life change if, instead, you focused your effort on what was truly yours, to control your preparation, your courage, your perspective? This is the power of the Stoic dichotomy of control. It is the key that unlocks resilience. It is the line that separates those who are broken by life from those who become unbreakable. To become undefeatable is not to command the world, it is to command yourself. One of the most misunderstood aspects of Stoicism is its emphasis on comfort, or rather, its deliberate rejection of it. To the modern ear, this can sound harsh. Why would anyone willingly make their life harder than it already is? Isn't the whole point of progress to make life easier, more comfortable, more secure? Yet the Stoics believed that by practicing discomfort in small, intentional ways, we train ourselves to withstand the greater storms that life inevitably brings. Seneca, in one of his letters, advised, set aside a number of days, during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, is this the condition that I feel? He wasn't suggesting self-punishment for its own sake. He was prescribing resilience. By stripping life down to its bare minimum, even temporarily, you remind yourself that survival does not depend on luxury. You realize that you can live with less, and in doing so, fear loosens its grip. The Stoics called this voluntary discomfort. It might mean sleeping on the floor when you have a bed, eating simple food when you have a feast, or walking instead of riding. In ancient times, it was a way to train the mind against poverty, hunger, or exile, fates that were all too common. In our time, the practice remains just as powerful, though the forms may change. Imagine you take a cold shower in the morning, not because you have to, but because you choose to. For a brief moment, your body resists, your mind protests, but then you endure. The shock passes, and you realize you are still standing. Or consider fasting for a day, putting down the endless snacks and comforts you usually reach for. Hunger comes, but it doesn't destroy you. In fact, you may even feel lighter, freer, more focused. These exercises are reminders. This is survivable. I am stronger than I thought. Why does this matter? Because comfort, for all its benefits, can make us fragile. The more we surround ourselves with softness, the less prepared we are when life strikes hard. If you expect every day to be warm, the first cold wind feels unbearable. But if you have trained in the cold, you meet the storm with calm. Voluntary discomfort is like a vaccine for the soul. You expose yourself to small doses of hardship, that when the real thing comes, you are not overwhelmed. Think about how fragile modern society has become in the face of inconvenience. A delayed flight, a slow internet connection, a minor setback at work, and frustration consumes us. Our ancestors endured hunger, disease, and war. Yet we crumble at the smallest disruption because we have lost the habit of enduring. The Stoics would see this as dangerous. A life too comfortable breeds weakness. To be undefeatable, you must prove to yourself, again and again, that you can do without. Of course, voluntary discomfort is not about misery for misery's sake. It is not about rejecting joy or beauty. It is about freedom. When you prove to yourself that you can live with less, the chains of fear break. You stop clinging so desperately to possessions, status, or routine. You stop panicking when things are taken away, because you know you can endure. And in that endurance lies real strength. Consider the story of Epictetus. Born a slave, he endured pain, humiliation, and hardship from the start. Yet instead of breaking, he used that suffering to sharpen his philosophy. He knew from experience that the body could be chained, but the mind could remain free. His entire teaching was shaped by endurance. He lived what many of us fear most, powerlessness, and discovered that power still existed within. We can practice this today in countless small ways. Leave your phone behind for a few hours and endure the silence. Sleep with no blanket for a night. Skip a meal. Walk instead of driving. At first, these may seem trivial, even silly, but what you are really doing is teaching your mind to detach from dependency, to see discomfort not as an enemy, but as a teacher. Ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen if you lost the comforts you rely on? Would you truly collapse, or would you adapt, survive, perhaps even grow stronger? The Stoics wanted you to answer that question before life forced you to. Voluntary discomfort is rehearsal. It is building the muscle of resilience, that when the storm hits and it will, you are not shocked, not broken, but steady. To be undefeatable does not mean avoiding pain. It means facing pain and realizing it does not own you. And every time you choose discomfort when comfort is available, you remind yourself of that truth. You become a little stronger, a little freer, a little closer to the Stoic ideal, a person who cannot be conquered, because they have already conquered themselves. If there is one illusion that enslaves more people than almost any other, it is the belief that our worth depends on things outside of us. Wealth, possessions, recognition, beauty, approval, these are the currencies of modern society. We are taught from childhood that if we acquire enough of them, we will finally feel secure, finally feel complete. But the Stoics knew this to be a trap. They saw it clearly 2,000 years ago, and their warning rings even louder today. Seneca wrote, "Learning to live with less will create space in your life for the things that truly matter." He was not praising poverty for its own sake, but pointing out the danger of dependency. When your happiness rests on things you cannot fully control, you build your house on sand. Sooner or later, the tide will come in and wash it away. Think of how modern life feeds this trap. Social media shows us curated images of people with perfect bodies, glamorous lifestyles, and constant success. Advertising tells us, day after day, that we're incomplete until we buy the next product, upgrade to the next model, reach the next level of status. We are conditioned to believe that happiness is always just beyond our grasp, available for a purchase if only we earn enough or look the right way. And yet, the more we chase, the emptier we feel. The Stoics diagnosed this disease long before Instagram existed. They warned that attaching your sense of worth to external values would make you fragile. Because what happens when the car breaks down? What happens when beauty fades? What happens when the applause stops? If you have placed your value in those things, then you collapse with them. You become as unstable as the world you are trying to control. True Stoicism turns the question inward. What is truly mine? What can never be taken away? The answer, the Stoics taught, is virtue or wisdom, your courage, your justice, your temperance. These are inequalities, not external possessions. They are the foundation that makes you undefeatable. Because no market crash, no betrayal, no illness can strip them from you. But we resist this truth because external values are seductive. They glitter, they make us feel good temporarily. A promotion feels wonderful. But if your entire identity depends on it, then a single rejection shatters you. A relationship can bring joy, but if your self-worth is built entirely on another person's love, then heartbreak destroys you. The Stoic way does not deny the pleasure of these things. It simply insists that they must never become the foundation of your peace. Consider this. How often have you chased something you thought would make you happy, only to find the satisfaction fading as soon as you got it? The new phone, the bigger house, the praise from others, all of it feels good for a moment. But then the hunger returns. It's like drinking salt water. The more you consume, the thirstier you become. Stoicism is the practice of breaking that cycle by rooting happiness in what is internal, stable, and truly yours. Modern psychology calls this hedonic adaptation the tendency to quickly return to a baseline of satisfaction known as how much external gain we achieve. The Stoics saw the same truth and offered the cure. Stop depending on externals for happiness. Instead, cultivate the mind and character that can stand firm regardless of what fortune gives or takes away. So ask yourself, what external values have you allowed to define you? Is it money, appearance, status, approval? And how fragile has that made you? How often have you felt shaken because those things wavered? And more importantly, what would your life feel like if your worth were no longer chained to them? To be undefeatable, you must free yourself from the trap of external values. It does not mean you reject wealth, beauty, or recognition altogether. It means you enjoy them when they come, but you do not depend on them for your identity. You are not a slave to fortune, because your foundation lies within. That is the radical freedom the Stoics lived by. That is the freedom that allows you to walk through life unshaken. Because your value is anchored in the only thing that is truly yours, the way you think, the way you act, the kind of person you choose to be. It is one thing to speak about Stoic principles in the abstract, and another to see them lived out in flesh and blood. The true test of philosophy is not in words, but in lives. And when we look to history, we find that Stoicism has produced men and women who embodied what it means to be undefeatable individuals who endured slavery, war, exile, and injustice, and yet remained steady, refusing to let circumstances dictate their character. Take Epictetus, for example, born into slavery in the Roman Empire. He had every reason to see himself as powerless. His body was not even his own. His freedom belonged to someone else. He suffered physical pain, cruelty, and the constant reminder that he was considered less than human. Yet Epictetus discovered something extraordinary. While his body could be chained, his mind could not. He realized that freedom does not begin with external circumstances, it begins within. He wrote, "You may fetter my leg, but not even Zeus has power over my will." This insight transformed him. After gaining his freedom, he became one of the most influential Stoic teachers in history, guiding others toward the same inner strength he had cultivated in chains. Epictetus stands as a reminder that undefeatability is not about privilege. It is about perspective. Then there is Marcus Aurelius, perhaps the most famous Stoic of all. As Emperor of Rome, he carried the crushing weight of empire on his shoulders. He faced relentless wars at the borders, political scheming at home, and a devastating plague that wiped out countless lives, including those close to him. Most of us would crumble under such pressure. Yet Marcus, instead of succumbing to despair, turned inward. Each night, he wrote in his private journal what we now call meditations, reminders to himself to stay calm, to act justly, to remember that death comes for all, and that his duty was to live with virtue no matter what surrounded him. Those writings were not polished essays for others to admire. They were man's fight to remain undefeated in the face of chaos. Seneca, too, provides a lesson. A statesman and advisor to the Emperor Nero, he lived in the shadow of power, wealth, and corruption. He saw firsthand how fragile life could be at court, where one whisper could end a man's career or his life. Seneca himself was eventually forced to take his own life under Nero's order, and yet, in his final hours, he faced death with composure, even offering comfort to his grieving friends. His calm acceptance in that moment reflected the very heart of Stoicism, that while we cannot control how long we live, we can control how we face the end. But Stoicism is not confined to the ancient world. Consider Nelson Mandela. During his 27 years in prison, he turned to philosophy, including the writings of Marcus Aurelius, to strengthen his mind. He endured cruelty, isolation, and injustice. Many expected him, upon release, to seek revenge. Instead, he chose reconciliation. He urged his people not to dwell on the past they could not change, but to build a future they could. That decision transformed not only his own life, but the fate of a nation. Mandela showed that Stoicism is not about passivity. It is about the strength to forgive, to rebuild, to lead without hatred. These examples of Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Mandela span centuries and continents. Yet they share a common thread. Each faced circumstances that could have broken them. Each suffered losses, betrayals, hardships beyond what most of us can imagine. And yet, they discovered that real power lies not in avoiding misfortune, but in meeting it with dignity. They became undefeatable not because life was easy for them, but because they refused to let difficulty dictate who they were. Ask yourself, who are your examples of the undefeatable? Perhaps it is not a philosopher or a political leader, but someone in your own life, a parent who endured hardship, a friend who faced illness with courage, a colleague who remained calm under pressure. The Stoic message is that this strength is not reserved for a chosen few. It is available to all of us, if we are willing to train our minds as rigorously as others train their bodies. The world is filled with storms, political, personal, financial, emotional. You cannot escape them, but you can decide what kind of person you will be when they come. The Stoics gave us examples to follow, maps drawn not with ink, but with lives lived in resilience. To study them is to remind yourself that undefeatability is not fantasy, it is possible, and it has been done, time and again. Philosophy is often dismissed as something abstract, detached from everyday life, a pursuit for scholars and bookshelves. But Stoicism refuses to stay locked in the past. Its principles have slipped quietly into some of the most practical and effective tools of modern psychology and medicine. The proof is simple. What helped people endure the storms of Rome still helps us endure the storms of today. Take rational emotive behavioral therapy, pioneered by Albert Ellis. At its core, REBT teaches that it is not events themselves that disturb us, but our beliefs about those events. Sound familiar? That is Epictetus, word for word. When a patient spirals into despair because of a rejection, REBT helps them challenge the belief, "This means I am worthless," and replace it with something healthier, like, "This is disappointing, but it does not define me." The method is ancient Stoicism dressed in modern clothes, guiding people out of destructive cycles of thought. Or consider logotherapy, developed by Viktor Frankl, a man who survived the unimaginable horrors of Nazi concentration camps. Frankl taught that humans can endure almost any suffering if they can find meaning in it. He famously wrote, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response." That single idea could have been lifted straight from a Stoic text. It echoes Marcus Aurelius' constant reminder that the mind remains free, even when the body is trapped. These therapies are not coincidences. They are continuations. Stoicism showed that our greatest suffering comes not from the outside world, but from the stories we attach to it. Modern psychology confirms it with data, experiments, and clinical practice. Together, they form a bridge across centuries, proving that wisdom is not bound by time. Even beyond therapy rooms, Stoic practices have found their way into wellness routines. Journaling, once Marcus Aurelius' private tool for self-reflection, is now recommended by psychologists as a way to untangle emotions and clarify thought. Mindfulness, though often linked to Eastern traditions, aligns closely with Stoic exercises in presence, focusing on the moment, stripping away unnecessary fears about past or future. The message is clear: Stoicism is not a relic. It is medicine for the mind, ancient but timeless. When you learn to pause before reacting, to question the beliefs that fuel your emotions, to seek meaning even in hardship, you are practicing therapy long before stepping into a clinic. So the next time you hear someone dismiss philosophy as impractical, remember this: Stoicism is already woven into the very methods we use to heal minds today. It is not just theory, it is therapy. And if emperors, slaves, and survivors have found strength in its principles, perhaps we can too. When we look back at the journey of Stoicism, from Zeno's shipwreck to the writings of Marcus Aurelius, from the endurance of Epictetus to the wisdom of Seneca, and even in the modern resilience of Nelson Mandela, are the therapies we use today, one truth becomes undeniable. To be undefeatable is not to avoid hardship, but to face it with clarity, courage, and composure. Life will strip things from you. Fortune will turn. People will betray. Circumstances will collapse. That much is certain. What is uncertain and what is entirely in your hands is how you respond. The Stoics remind us that storms are not the enemy. The enemy is surrendering our peace to things we cannot control. True strength begins when we accept the world as it is and then choose to act with virtue regardless. Think about your own storms. Maybe you are carrying disappointments that still sting. Maybe you are facing uncertainty in your career, your relationships, your health. The question is not whether these difficulties will come, they always will. The question is, when they do, will you let them defeat you? Or will you, like Zeno, like Marcus, like Mandela, turn them into the very foundation of your resilience? To be undefeatable does not mean you never fall. It means you rise every time you do. It means you measure success not by external applause, but by the effort you put in, by the integrity you live with, by the calm you maintain in the face of chaos. That kind of strength cannot be stolen by markets, or by fate, or by the opinion of others. It belongs to you, and you alone. So, as we close, I want you to ask yourself one simple question. What is one Stoic principle you can put into practice today? Maybe it's the dichotomy of control reminding yourself to stop wasting energy on what you can't change. Maybe it's voluntary discomfort, choosing a small challenge to toughen your mind. Maybe it's journaling your thoughts, as Marcus did, to bring order to the chaos. Whatever it is, begin now. Philosophy means nothing if it remains in books. It must be lived. And if this message has spoken to you, then don't let it end here. Join us at StoicCraft, where we continue to explore these timeless lessons and bring them into the modern world. Subscribe, share this with someone who might need it, and carry the wisdom forward. The world needs more people who are calm in the storm, who can see clearly, act justly, endure bravely, and inspire quietly. Everything ends. Our possessions, our titles, even our lives. But what endures is the strength of a mind that refuses to be broken. That is the gift of Stoicism, and it is a gift available to you right now. All you need to do is choose it.